Okay, in this video we're going to talk about the causes of World War I. And it's important to note that the causes and the spark of World War I are two different things. Don't get these confused. So as we go through this video, here are the questions that you should be writing down answers to share in class tomorrow. Number one, what we have to figure out is what were the main causes of World War I? Number two, how had these been building tension in Europe for years? This war doesn't just blow up overnight. It's a lot of problems building up over many decades that finally snap in 1914. And our third essential question is, why was the assassination of Franz Ferdinand the spark and not the cause of World War I? So let's talk about these four main causes. MAIN is an acronym that people like to use to remember them. First cause was nationalism. Now we've talked about nationalism a lot this year, which is pride plus cultural identity. Nationalism was bad for some countries, like multinational empires, with many cultural identities in one empire, like the Austrian Empire and the Ottoman Empire and the Russian Empire. Austria-Hungary was multinational. There were just a dozen or more cultural identities only within the Balkan area, and throughout that empire there were over a dozen cultural identities. Bosnians were one of these identities. Bosnians were part of Austria-Hungary. Austria-Hungary annexed or took Bosnia into their empire as they were growing, but they wanted to be part of Serbia instead, or they wanted to be independent, but they were very much like Serbia, which is right next door. And Serbians were much closer to Bosnians in identity than Austrians were. So would you rather hang out with people that are like you or people that are not like you? I mean, there's pros and cons to each one, but we kind of naturally drift towards people we are similar to. And that's what happens here. Bosnia doesn't want to be part of the Austrian Empire. They want to be aligned with Serbia and Serbia's big brother, Russia. Austria-Hungary obviously disagrees because nobody likes to give up land or power, and they keep Bosnia as part of their empire, thinking, oh, we can keep them in this empire, we can make them happy and assimilate them. Germany, on the other hand, has lots of nationalism in a good way. The Germans truly believed, like many other countries in Europe, that they were the greatest people on earth. So it was, people loved the Kaiser, or emperor, of the German Empire. And Great Britain was the same thing. They had a lot of pride. It's one thing to have pride in your country. It's another thing to believe that you're the number one people in the world. And then it's an even another thing on top of that, to feel like you have to prove this to everybody else. France is finally more stable at this point after the Franco-Prussian War. They've had a republic. They're probably the closest thing to a real democracy in Europe at this time that we could find. And for all those countries, nationalism is a good thing. It strengthens their country. But as we get closer and closer to World War I, we find that nationalism kind of goes a little bit overboard, and it's causing these countries to push closer and closer to a conflict. Cause number two is competition, also known as imperialism. There's a competition to be number one in Europe. Each one of these countries wants to prove to the others that they are the best. And they do this through imperialism, which is a race to control the most land. We think of the Berlin Conference in 1885, when 90% of Africa is carved up. Well, after that conference, if you want more land in Africa, you're going to have to take it from somebody else. So there is a serious competition and tension growing throughout the world as all these colonies are gobbled up. Colonies were a sign of strength. They provided natural resources. They were markets to sell your stuff and make money off of, which we talked about in the last unit. And there's also this industrial competition. Who can outproduce the other countries? And we still have that competition today with economies in the world. The strongest countries in the world today as well typically are the countries that produce the most stuff and have the largest economies. So Germany has been catching up to Great Britain, which has always been the number one country in Europe in modern times, and they're now a very close number two to Great Britain. This obviously makes Great Britain very nervous, and a very serious rivalry is growing between Germany and Great Britain as Germany is looking for ways to compete with Great Britain. At the same time, France, which is probably the number three country in Europe at this time, wants revenge for the Franco-Prussian War. So as you can see, France and Great Britain, who've normally been enemies, are kind of drifting closer to each other because they both hate Germany. Cause number three of World War I is militarism. And militarism is when a country builds up its military as much as possible. We also call it an arms race, when you try to just take all that money you make from your industrial production, and the money doesn't intimidate the other countries, but the weapons you buy with that money does. So Germany wants to rival Great Britain's navy and army. Germany actually had the best army in Europe, but Great Britain had the best navy. So Germany starts building destroyer ships and battleships. They start developing submarines, which is a new technology at this time. And this is definitely threatening Great Britain to the point that they start building up their navy even more, and they start boosting their ground army. Along with this militarism attitude is that people believed war was the highest honor. It had been about 100 years almost since Napoleon marched right through Europe, and it's been almost 100 years now at this point since there was a war where everybody was involved and it affected everybody on the continent. So very few people, if anybody, actually recall what a total war looks like in Europe. So war is seen as a honor, as a good thing, as a proving point. In some of the documents we look at in class, people in Germany argue that you can't have a growing empire and a golden empire without war, that it is a natural process in becoming the greatest empire on earth. So like we said, the last major wars, Franco-Prussian War, but the last major war involving every country in Europe were the Napoleonic Wars back in the early 1800s. So this all leads to cause number 4, which is alliances. Alliances are formed based on friends and enemies. Germany and Great Britain are rivals now because they are the #1 and #2 countries in Europe. Russia and Germany become enemies because even though the Kaiser of Germany and the Tsar of Russia are cousins, Germany has canceled a treaty between the two countries, which very much upsets Russia and causes them to become enemies. Russia also upsets Austria-Hungary because they are trying to compete with Austria-Hungary for dominance of the Balkan Peninsula. So they are telling Bosnia secretly, not so secretly, to try to break away from Austria-Hungary. And they are telling Serbia, who's also encouraging Bosnia, that they've got their back if anything ever broke out. Now, obviously, this is going to upset the Austrian Empire, so Russia and Austria-Hungary are enemies because of their conflict in the Balkans. So, this causes all of the major powers in Europe at this time to break off into 2 alliances before the war even starts. The Triple Entente was France, Great Britain, and Russia, and the Triple Alliance was Germany, Austria-Hungary, and Italy. And this chart basically shows you how the alliances broke down. If you see a blue arrow, you'll see a friendship or an alliance between 2 countries, but I use the term friendship very loosely. For example, France and Russia. Russia is probably the least democratic country in Europe. France the most democratic. So why are they allies right before World War I? Well, we see that they have a common enemy in Germany. Great Britain and Russia had been competing against each other in imperialism in the Crimean War. Why are they friends now? Why are they allies? As we see again, they have a common enemy in Germany. France and Great Britain had hated each other for about 1,000 years, but they start to become friends, or frenemies, as we would call them, because again, a common enemy in Germany. Austria-Hungary has beef with Russia over the Balkans. Everybody has a problem, basically, with somebody on the other side, except for Italy. So how does Italy end up in the Triple Alliance? Well, quite simply because Italy and Germany share a common history. They were both united into countries in 1871, so that made them allies. But as you notice, Italy doesn't really have any enemies on the Triple Entente side, and that's going to be important after the war breaks out. But these are the sides before the war. So if you've basically created teams, you are building up your weapons, you truly believe that you're #1 and you have to find a way to prove it, and there is increasing competition to control the most land in the world, at some point all this tension is building up and something is going to have to set it off. So we're basically waiting for an excuse to go to war. And this is Europe right before World War I. So what is our excuse to go to war? Well, Wilhelm II takes over in Germany, and Otto von Bismarck, who was a moderate voice calling Germany a satisfied power, gets fired because Wilhelm wants to push the boundaries of the German Empire and make Germany the most dominant empire in the world. To do this, he puts a lot of emphasis on military power, and again, that pushes everybody else to increase their military as well. But the spark that sets everything off happens in the Austrian Empire. Franz Ferdinand is the Archduke of the Austrian Empire, which means he's next in line to become Emperor of Austria-Hungary. He visits Sarajevo, which is the capital of Bosnia, in June of 1914 as kind of a goodwill tour to show the Bosnians that he wants them to work as part of the empire and he doesn't resent them and he wants to bring them in. Unfortunately, this is not a good situation, and he's not going to be able to accomplish that task because the Black Hand, a Serbian terrorist group, plots an assassination to really just set off all of this tension in Europe. And they succeed. Gavrilo Princip, a member of the Black Hand, assassinates Franz Ferdinand and his wife Sophie on June 28, 1914, and this sets in motion the war machine. This is the spark that sets off all that tension caused by the four main causes of World War I. Here's a photograph of Franz Ferdinand and his wife Sophie on the day that he was assassinated. And there is obviously a strong reaction to this. When Franz Ferdinand is assassinated, Gavrilo Princip, the assassin, is arrested. He actually doesn't get executed because they couldn't tell if he was 17 or 18, and it was illegal to execute minors in the in the Austrian Empire. So Princip is put in prison, but he dies shortly thereafter of tuberculosis. Regardless, the Black Hand, a radical group, is Serbian. So there's an ultimatum given to Serbia, which is basically turn over anybody we believe was part of this operation, stop all anti-Austrian activity, or we will declare war on you. And as we'll talk about in the next video, that's not a very reasonable ultimatum, and before we know it, war has been declared in Europe, and everybody else is going to be dragged into this conflict.